Item F12, approval of Illuminate Education Formative and Common Assessment Platform. Dr. Knox Phillips.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Superintendent, and members of the board. This item is for the renewal of our Formative and Common Assessment Platform, otherwise known as Illuminate. We've had a couple of years with this platform, and initially, as you may recall, the entire purpose of formative and common assessments was to do a better job as a district at assessing the quality and the efficacy of our new curriculum. You heard from Ms. Stapney just a moment ago regarding the initial phase, the third phase is coming into play. Over the course of the last couple of years, we have the opportunity to create some incredibly strong assessments in this platform, otherwise known as our benchmark assessments. And what that's allowed us to do is it's provided us the opportunity to assess students at the completion of every instructional unit. And we've done some tweaking of this work over the last couple of years with teacher assistance and support. But what it's allowed us to really accomplish as a district is on-demand information on where students lie in terms of academic achievement. In previous years, we were waiting almost to the end of the year when they had their end of the year assessments to determine what needed to happen. By that time, it is way too late to assess the student and to assist the student if you haven't done measures up until that time. And so this work was incredibly important for our teachers and for our administrators. And in fact, we created a number of assessments in all grade levels, from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. In addition to that, teachers also have access to over 100,000 common and formative assessment items in this bank. And so the platform has been very useful, particularly because it collaborates or combines all data on a student. So milestones, benchmarks, map assessment, so on and so forth, in one place for the teacher to look at that student and make a very sound decision as to what instructional resource or instructional interventions the students actually need. So the work has been very well received and very well implemented. This item asks for an amount not to exceed $704,000 to continue with our system. It is in compliance with several state mandates, obviously, around testing and assessing of students, but we like to look at this as an opportunity for us to improve instruction, and we thank you for the previous years of approval. That being said, this item is being put forth for the consent agenda, barring any questions, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Knox Phillips. Mr. Orson.
Dr. Phillips, thank you very much. And let me preface what I'm about to say with the appreciation that we and every other system are really trying to get a handle on where our students stand, to find the best pathway to optimize the outcomes. I don't question the sincerity of the effort and the motivation behind it. But I'm not as sanguine as you, because and I'm sure my fellow board members get an earful from both teachers and parents, in large part about the cumulative impact of the amount of testing we do, and a concern that we're not addressing ways to manage that testing in a way that is less intrusive and less time consuming. So, I'm not of that school that we can't have testing. We know we have to have testing, and among other reasons. We're driven to it by federal and state regulations. But, after facilities, that's where my inbox fills up the most, is about concerns about how much we do, how much time it takes, how many days of instruction it takes, how much time the actual application of the tests take. And so, we're not going to solve the underlying issue right here, but I know we've had some discussions, and I think it's important to sort of bring it to public light, because I think you've heard some of these. I know Ms. Stepney has heard some of these. I think it's really critical that we be moving towards finding a way to reduce this amount and narrow its impact before the new school year starts. And let me give you an example, because I think this is one of those things where great intentions and even data, when the application of the data doesn't necessarily reflect what the objective was. So I remember we've had this conversation before. How long does the Illuminate testing take? And your answer generally has been, it's only a few questions. On average, it doesn't take a long time. And I accept that, except in interacting with a fair number of teachers now, their view is the amount of time it takes is not the average amount of time it takes for students, but how much time it takes for the last student to complete an Illuminate testing. And the reason is they can't move on with their instruction until the last student is finished with it. And that's mean, median. My kids know that all much better than I did. I was a poli-sci major. But we know that the implication of that is that regardless of what the average is, if it's the time it takes for the last student, it means everything stops until the last student is completed. So if it's not an average of 10 minutes, but it's an average of 30 minutes, an end result of 30 minutes, then 30 minutes has been lost. And then that has a cascading effect on everything we do. If we're using these instruments to figure out where our students are, and therefore we're reducing the amount of instructional time available because we have to wait for the last student, which is understandable, then it seems to me we need to find a way to reduce the impact of these tests, albeit they're positive intention. And so my question really is, I know we discussed when we were particularly at agenda setting some strategies to try to address and narrow the scope of some of this testing so it is not intrusive, because when I get from schools and teachers and we have 2 weeks essentially of daily Illuminate testing in one subject, they perceive that as encroaching on their ability to fulfill their responsibility, which is instructing students. So now perhaps you can address that in some way.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for your comments. They're well noted. So to address the issue around the implementation of testing, the last student scenario you gave, what we have to do as a district, and we're continuing to work with our teachers on in terms of building a greater skill set, is not to treat an assessment as a separate item. Assessment and instruction are hand in hand. It should not be you instruct, then you assess. Assessment happens integral to teaching, right? And so I think historically we've had this system as a district where we teach and then we test and then we teach, and it's always this event. And what our formative assessments are aimed to do is remove the high stakes nature away from assessments, whether there are assessments or state assessments, and bring assessments to the classroom so that they're integrated. So to your point, when it comes to testing students, a teacher should never feel like in these testing windows that they're testing one class at entire time. You can have 2 students testing on one particular day and your other 23 students working on an actual lesson or working in small stations or whatever the case might be. So part of our work in professional learning has been around how do we make sure that we're not treating this as an event, because when you do, you run into problems where as a teacher you feel like this is too much, it's too overwhelming, because it's not properly woven into the day-to-day practice of teaching.
I want to interrupt you for a second, because I appreciate the sentiment behind that. And I think there's some truth, but part of it is the communication that comes from the district, which is they're given these calendars, Illuminate testing, week of December 3rd and December 10th. It takes on the sense like it is an event. The other part, though, ties into a little bit of another subject, which has to do with lesson planning and sequencing and delivery of curriculum and the evaluation process we use for teachers. And you think, oh, what does that have to do with it? Except if you have 2 students here and 23 students here, and you get out of sequence and you've written up a lesson plan for the day and you stuck it in the folder on the door and somebody's there to evaluate you, and all of a sudden you're off the lesson plan because of a sentiment, which I agree with, which is some more flexibility. There's another set of problems that you didn't design or intend. You weren't intending, besides we know the issue of how much time it takes for the lesson plans, which is a different issue. But, it's the unintended consequences of this, right? So I get, you don't want to be an event. You should just be able to work it in. It shouldn't be as much time consuming. You can split your students among it. But if you do that, all of a sudden your daily lesson plans are now off sequence, possibly for some or all of your students. And therefore, you've created another set of obstacles for teachers, particularly if it just happens to be one of their lucky days when somebody's coming in to do an evaluation in there. And that's where my concern is. Like the parts, which may be all well-intended, aren't necessarily fully harmonized or respecting what the great challenge is, particularly, and we know that this is more acute at the elementary school level, where, for example, teachers have to develop lesson plans in 4 subjects for every day. So it's not like teachers teaching one class and can put it out. So I need to interrupt you because I think it's an important part of this discussion.
We totally understand. I think, we are in our 3rd year, going into our 3rd year of common assessment, a common system of assessments. And there are many goals that we have to refine and reduce testing, including, as a district, do we want to look at common final exams? Do we want to concord certain tests with others, meaning that we say, okay, if you do well on a benchmark assessment, that can be put put in place of a final exam. There are policy decisions and practice decisions we have to make as a team, but it's predicated on having reliable data. And it takes, statistically, from a research point of view, a number of years to perfect your system, just as we learned with the state assessments, right, before you can start applying those types of measures. But the points that you mentioned are well heard. We have an actual online forum where teachers submit their feedback constantly to us. In fact, we made a number of changes this year as a result of teacher feedback, and so we continue to perfect the system. But the ultimate goal is to make it so that a student does not feel like I'm coming today for an event. This is part of my daily instruction, and that they're motivated to show us what they can do. And I totally understand the argument. Part of the conundrum is that at the same time, we are also, I can say this publicly, I guess, working with other districts in the state to move away from the Georgia milestones. There's a huge initiative around looking at formative, locally developed, regionally developed types of assessments that take the high-stakes nature away from that. In order for us to get to the point where we can do that, and that's where we want to go, is we have to perfect our localized assessments. They have to pass state and federal regulations. And so that work to us is sort of the end game, and we understand and we are so empathetic to the hiccups in between, and we'll continue to work on those. But I do want to also say, and I can't say this publicly yet because data is not released from the state, but there are a number of data improvements in core content areas as a result of on-demand data availability. The opportunity for teachers to take student information quickly and strategically and do something with it to improve learning is paying off for our district. So on the one hand, like in my job, working in assessment, you're never going to please everybody. So on the one hand, I want to continue the work. On the other hand, I have to make those tweaks. I understand that. But at the end of the day, when I look at student achievement and I see scores of students improving, I got to figure out where is the happy medium for everyone, because we haven't had that level of achievement in the past because we haven't had these systems in place, both curriculum and assessment.
Right, and I appreciate it, and I know about the map and milestone, and I'll address it on the next agenda item, and I'll make one last comment so my colleagues can also address this. But I think it's really critical before we get to the next school year that you be able to make a pronouncement on substantive reductions in the time required in the implementation of this. The burnout rate, and I'm hearing it from teachers, from highly effective teachers who are just swimming, drowning in all this. And I think, again, we know that there's some things are based on the positioning and the interpretation of it, but some of it is in the sheer amount of it. And it's incumbent, I just think it is absolutely incumbent upon us collectively to figure out to reduce that load, because as teachers say, I know to me, and I'm sure to everybody else, their job is instruction, right? That's their job. The tools may involve testing, but their job is instruction, and they feel like we are impeding them from doing their job, and that's never a good sign in any industry. It makes the HR person's life much, much harder. And we don't want to make her life harder because she's trying to get back to retirement.
We heard that loud and clear. We used to have unit assessments, so every 4 to 6 weeks, student assessed. We heard from our teachers, and we reduced the benchmarks to 4 times 4 windows per year, so they're not testing after every unit. Keep in mind that every assessment on the benchmark is on average, like you said, about 6 or 7 questions depending on the assessment. But we've reduced
that average creates a problem.
But we've reduced the windows to 4 times per year, which is an incredible reduction in testing when it comes to benchmark assessments. And just so you know, when we started working with this product, in fact, MAP actually back in 2015, is it? We took away the Iowa, we took away a number of assessments. We opened up the entire fall period for teachers to have that time to really work and teach. And so we're doing a lot of interventions, multi-tier system of support, RTI type work in those types of windows, which you're going to see materialize in the achievement data from this last year.
Dr. Morley?
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. I was hoping that you weren't coming in here trying to ask for more money to get more assessments because it's like I've told you each year. I think we've spent an inordinate amount of money on assessment tools. I'm glad to hear you say that, we're 3 years in or whatever, but to me, you don't have to wait till 3 years to see if it's assessing what it's supposed to assess. There has to be something that can give some information, and I think that's what bothers me the most with these huge amounts that we're spending, not only on these assessment tools, but on some other things that we're doing, because there's never a report as to what's going on. Feedback. There should be something. Here's what it's supposed to be measuring. It's measuring that. We're still waiting, but we haven't gotten to a finality where we can actually have a longitudinal type study in order to be able to tell. But it shouldn't take that. Not for $900,000. It shouldn't take that. And my thing is at some point, we've got to be prudent within this district to just stop taking millions and throwing out an assessment tool, this, that, the other. And I think some things do have to be assessed, but then it's how are we doing it? And can we find a way that we can be able to get these where we're not having to throw money after it each year to be able to get it done? We do need to know what's going on. We do need to have something that could be a predictability, but all reality, because of the variables that are out there, you can't predict everything. And so you can measure what's there. Is it valid? Is it reliable? Are those measures going to measure what they say that they can do? And so I just think that finding a way over time, and I've asked for this, ever since you've been here, for us to be able to find a way to be able to internally be able to look at what the state's looking for, what we're looking for, and see can there be some type of a coming together, marriage of sort, as to the type of assessment tools that we're utilizing, so we're not having to spend this kind of money. This is a lot of money, and it's not the first. And when we begin to look at the others that have been put in here, a lot of money just has gone out. And we want the best. We want to be able to know what our children need. And as Mr. Orson was saying, we want to make sure also that we're not taxing on our teachers to have to do this, because it's adding one more thing, and we're not adding the extra dollars to go with the one more thing. So I just would like for us, and through curriculum, to begin to look at what can we do in order to cut down on the cost. Can we get something that we can utilize, that we're not having to expend this kind of money, $1 million pretty much every year or more, in order to be able to do it. And I never hear any feedback as to whether it's working, is it working. And I was hearing it has to wait for the 3 years. We haven't had enough time. But either it's going to work or it's not going to work, because I'm not going to buy a refrigerator and put it in my house, and I've got to wait a year in order to see if the food is going to get cold. And so I think that we have to begin to look at it from that perspective. Does it do what it says it's supposed to do? It shouldn't take that long to be able to do it. I thank you for your efforts, most certainly, and I know you work hard, and I know you're doing what needs to be done, but I just still believe that we've got to find a way to be able to cut the costs on these assessment tools, and beginning to look at, we might need assessment, but are these the right ones to be able to assess? And I don't like that trying on anything. We can't. I'm not going to go buy anything that I'm trying out and trying. When I go in and buy it, I want it, and I'm going to keep it. So we've got to begin to look at and make sure that measures up to what we want it to measure up. So that's something that we can look at over time. We've talked about this before.
Yes, ma'am, and
Okay.
we absolutely will. I think one thing we've done importantly is we've worked with other districts. So the majority of the metro districts are sort of using the same systems and cycles. We've banded together, used our brain sources, our resources. When it comes to assessment development, and again, this is a philosophical decision we have to make as a district. The cost to develop assessments, to test assessments statistically, reliability, validity, and using all types of high-level PhD theoretical frameworks to apply to those can go upwards to millions when you have it in-house.
But you're already spending millions to have it out-house.
Right. Let me
I mean,
Dr. Moreland, if you don't mind.
yeah.
And so what we want to make sure is we position our district where we're in a place where we're strong enough to do that on our own. I'm going to be very transparent with you. When I took this job in 2015, we had no assessments.
That's true.
We were flying a plane blind. And I told Dr. Green at the time, and I'm getting passionate about it because it means a lot to me, but I told him at the time, we cannot assess this way. We don't know what's happening in our classrooms. We don't know what's happening in teacher quality. We have no idea what's going on. I agree with you. We have to get to the point where we're completely self-sufficient. But you got to walk before you can run. And this is a walk right now. It's a journey. We've worked incredibly hard as a district in training our principals. We've certified teachers. We've certified leaders to be able to do this work on their own, to start building that internal capacity, and then look at how we can divert resources to build that up. But as a district, we just weren't there. We were broken. And our accreditation review said it. And so for me, when I'm looking at where we go from this point on, I want to get this district to a point where we can sustain on our own. But you have to be realistic and manage expectations. In 2015, we weren't there. We weren't there. And when I'm seeing data I'm seeing now, where our third grade students, I shouldn't say this, I'm going to say it, are improving in reading and improving in math because our teachers can get to them right away, that's important to me. And we got to figure out the logistics part, the money part. But I can't put the baby second to all of that, if that makes sense. I'm really trying to figure out a way to manage that, and I appreciate the feedback because it helps us plan better and do better. But I want to be realistic and transparent about where we've been as a district and where we've come. And I don't want to see us fall back to 50% graduation rates. Does that make sense? I don't want to be overly passionate about it.
Listen, I came in when it was broken too.
I know, yes,
and so when we look at it, so you preaching to the choir. I came in before you came in with the brokenness, so it was broken then than it was then. So I understand the brokenness. So that's neither here nor there. My thing is that as we go along, we find out a way to be more prudent, more efficient, more effective. And so we're looking at 15. This is 19. We can't operate the same way. You know, I remember when my church was growing, and you start out with 7, and you get 700, and you get 7,000. You can't operate the same, and everybody can't go with you. Some people got to be left behind. So you can't keep doing the same thing and waiting for something to happen. You're brilliant. Brilliant, I consider you. And we have a lot of other brilliant minds. You're actually out there with other people who are out there. We have some brilliant people who work here. So it's putting these minds together and coming up with a way while we're relying on other people. We see what's happening with the country when you start relying on other people in order to be able to do things, in order to be able to get China and everybody else. And then when they decide to take away, then what's going to happen? That's like in a relationship. You wait for somebody to make you happy, and when you're not feeling happy anymore, you're broken. So it comes to a point where there has to be some self-reliance, and so we have to figure out a way to do it. And while we're waiting, and because we still seem to be crawling, we may be walking, but at some point that baby moves from that toddler to that walking and running stage where you can't manage them. But at the same time, it's figuring out a way along the way, because if we wait, you know, they used to have a saying, when I was coming up, wait broke the bridge down. So what's that wait? And Martin Luther King has a quote on that. What are we doing in the meantime? Because while we're doing this and spending this kind of money, are we actually beginning to look at ideas? Because you're very smart. And looking at the people who can be with you, as you say, you work with other districts. Can the districts come together and maybe put funds together and be able to utilize and come up with something? I mean, that would be powerful. And then coming out of, a centralized area. So I'm just saying, while we're on the path and trying to get to wherever we're supposed to be, we can't wait till after 4 or 5 years and say, now we're going to stop making it, because then what's going to happen? You're going to take another 5 to 10 years to do it. And there are people who are willing to do research. There are grants. There are all of that out there. I know about it all. That can help us to be able to cut some of these costs, to be able to do the testing, to get the cohorts together, do reliability. Because the thing about it is that we're testing on the children now. So 4 years later, those children who are at a certain level, they're 4 years gone. If they were in high school, they're gone. So they can't wait. We can't keep waiting. So all I'm asking is that as we're going through this process, to be prudent, to be coming up with ideas and looking at ways for us to mobilize those forces to be able to come together and have it, so we're not spending this kind of money. And where we can say, you know what, it's like an education. Once I earn it, you can take everything from me, but you can't take my education. Once you've made it and you put it together, can't anybody come here and take it? If they decide to have it go out of business, or it's no longer in date, it's not being printed anymore, you lose the rights to all of it. So that's all I'm saying. But no, y'all have done great, but I just want to see us get to a point where we're sustained. Sustainability is basically on us and not out. We spend a lot of money on these outside vendors and outside programs and things, and we have too much knowledge. I mean, we're power brokers here as far as knowledge is concerned, and I want to be able to see it utilized. Okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Morley. Mr. Jester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your passion about this, Dr. Phillips. So I'm a very simple person, and I talk to a lot of teachers, parents, and principals, across the district, across the state, and I have yet have one of them come to me and say, Mr. Jester, can we have more standardized testing? You know what I mean? Right. So I would say before you and Dr. Morley got here, we did have some amount of testing. Granted, we just didn't get feedback quick enough to really do anything effective about it, right? Right?
That's correct.
Right, right. So, point being is that would it be possible to better target where we need these assessments and not assess the in the areas where we don't need them as much?
Yes, we've done some of that. In fact, if you recall, historically, for decades actually, the CAP offered both the Iowa test and the COGAT, the Cognitive Abilities Test, to every student in the district. That's when I came on board, I met with my team and other divisions, and I said, why are we offering this assessment to every student if it's only being used for gifted qualification? Why not just offer the test to students who are on the pipeline to get the qualification, right? So then we were able to remove those extra assessments. Part of our master plan, strategic plan around assessment is to get to the point, and you've seen this before, I think, in board retreats, we've had the 3 cycles of the year, and they're protected cycles where we just look at formative data. The idea is that we want to continue to reduce. There is an elephant in the room, which is this high-stakes assessment that the state requires us to do right now. And although we are a strategic waiver district, we can't waive from compulsory testing. And so the number of concerns that I get from parents, and I've had many meetings and conversations around the Georgia Milestones. Dr. Green, and we've met with Governor Kemp about this before, and there is a lot of traction on ground to move away that requirement for districts that have their own reliable systems that have to continue testing on Georgia Milestones.
But that's going to be replaced with MAP,
That will
ideally
be
in the
replaced
future.
with some assessment system. I'm not going to say MAP. It could be.
All right.
If
Well, let's move that
we
to
decide
the-
that as a district. But I'm going to say that the localized control over that, how we issue assessments, when we issue them, what we apply the data for, will benefit the district so much greater than the 2 events we have a year where we're testing Georgia Milestones.
Well, let's move that conversation to the next agenda item. I think that would be better.
Sure.
I wanted to talk more about, we have high-performing teachers all across the district, and I want to say that all these assessments tell them information they already know. So we're doing more harm than we are good for those teachers. Is there any way to target these teachers that need the assessments more than other teachers?
There are ways to tier assessments. We can't,
Well, first of all, is there any desire to?
to some degree. So, for example, if you're at a high-performing school, say you have a 4th grade class and they're all in the 90-plus percentile, we don't want you testing in 4th grade. You need to be testing in 5th grade because we know those students are likely being exposed to next grade level content. So the idea, it may not be necessarily to tier for the sake of removing assessments, but to tier for the sake of applying the assessment to where it's needed the most. I think when we started
Well,
this
those
work,
teachers, if you'd let me interrupt,
Yeah,
those
yeah.
teachers are complaining that they don't need them, they do no good, and they would like to stick with the instruction. Is there any chance that we can do that?
I don't know from a federal standpoint. Because
So
of the
our
reason-
unit test, no, and
You
I'm
know,
not
we
saying
use a lot of
these,
federal funding that's based on assessments.
I'm
that we
not saying
can
the state
eliminate
test, I'm
assessments.
saying the district standardized testing that we make them do, these quarterly unit tests. I mean, it used to be after every unit, but we've moved it to quarterly, like you said.
Yeah,
But-
we can look into that. I think the impact of that is far more than I could effectuate at this time. I'd rather go back and meet with my colleagues in instruction and figure out what we can do regarding that. What I want to make sure is that we don't move blindly in this process because sometimes a school can be high performing in this majority subgroup, but in this
Obviously,
minority
you can have
subgroup,
failing
they're
teachers in a
not.
high-performing school.
Right, and teachers and students. And so what I don't want to do, for example, at a Dunwoody High School, do an excellent job, an excellent principal at the helm. The issue we're having at Dunwoody is how do we move our students in our minority, ethnic minority, and special education and English learner subgroups. So while you know what I mean, it's a delicate balance because you want
Sure.
to make sure you're not putting the school at a disadvantage. But certainly something we'll certainly look into that. I'll give you my word on that. We'll look
Right.
into it and see to what extent we can.
I think we can all
want to
agree that-
minimize any way we can, but we don't want to put the school at a
Right.
disadvantage.
If we're trying to solve one problem,
Right.
that we don't try to apply that solution to everybody in
I
a
agree.
one-size-fits-all.
I agree.
Because I think we end up doing a lot more harm to everybody else, and we're really just targeting it for one problem.
I agree. And then some of the conversation have to be around, from a board standpoint, like what outcomes do you want to be made aware of? We've talked before about metrics and those types of things. What is it that you want to see? And that will help us on the ground level figure out how to apply our assessments. If you say, I want to know how many third grade students are reading on grade level quarterly, we'll tell you that. But we have to implement some kind of assessment to do that. So a lot of that is driven also by the district's desire. So we're here at your pleasure. And if that's what you want to do, we'll look into that. But I want to be very careful. And I'm also going to give you honest feedback about making sure we are in compliance, but that we don't disadvantage the school in the process, but also making sure that we serve the needs of the community. So it's a balance, but we can make it happen.
I think another piece to add to that, though, too, is even for high-performing schools, teachers, and students, not only just because of the state requirement, but they
Mike.
growth for them as well.
Mike.
Sorry. That if we, because I hear underneath that is if you're high-performing, if teachers have high-performing, then don't assess, then the assessment's not meaningful.
I'm concerned that
But
it's
there's
not
growth-
telling
there's-
them
there's
something
growth
that they
for
don't
them.
already know.
There's growth that needs to take place there in ways that we've seen in many of our high-performing schools, that if we take our eye off of that, then we will lose the momentum that we've gained with them as well.
Well, the teachers and principals are not convinced that that's what's going on. Okay, but the parents are paying the bills, and the teachers and principals are on the ground, and I'm concerned that we're forcing on them because we believe that that's the right thing to do. And I'm inclined to go with the people paying the bills and the people on the ground. And it sounds like a noble idea, and I hope that is the case, but I'm concerned with what I'm hearing on the ground and the people paying the bills. Thanks, Dr. Green.
And we can have at some point a more in-depth conversation. I want to show you the data of our schools. Make sure that the decisions that we make are not just because, and I get it, feedback and concern, sentiment is high importance to us. But when I see a student that's a fourth grade student reading on a second grade level, I cannot turn my head to that. I have got to push to you what solutions we have to bring forward. And the majority of our students in the district historically are not on grade level. We have a amount of students that are above grade level in middle school, on a college level, but that's not the makeup of the majority of our district. So we've got to make sure whatever decisions that we make as a body do not leave out or disadvantage any one group of students.
Thank you, Dr. Knox Phillips. Mr. Orson?
So I hear you, right? So I understand that. And I think everybody shares that sentiment. How we define it is varies. But I think it's really important that we're careful not to trap ourselves into, I think, Stan's point, solutions that could be more narrowly focused to get to the outcome we need to get. I mean, one of the big complaints about No Child Left Behind was it treated everybody exactly the same, right, across the board. And every Student Succeeds Act was meant to give flexibility to target these solutions. But there were some good attributes of No Child Left Behind that people don't want to acknowledge. The biggest part being that it required states, districts, and schools to disaggregate the data to the point you were making earlier. You have a high-performing school, and you can have subgroups that are underperforming. The fact is we now know that because of the legacy of No Child Left Behind. I mean, I tell people all the time, if there's anything you take away from that, that's the one thing we should take away, because it forced all of us collectively to recognize that there were failures buried inside success. So we know that, but it feels like sometimes we're not taking full advantage of that part of the data, which is we are using like the howitzer or something smaller and more to get to the problem and to solve the problem. We know that there are students, the fourth grader that you see that is behind grade level, that we may be underserving and we need a solution. The question is the solution targeted at the 23 other students who may all be on grade level? Therefore, are we creating a bigger problem and a bigger impediment to teaching, or are there strategies and investments? Some of this costs money, right? Some of this is rethinking about how we deliver education so that we can get that fourth grade student back to grade level and back to their peers. I think sometimes people feel like we're putting the brakes on everybody for the other 23 to get the one student up to grade level, as opposed to trying to find a way to get that fourth grader to grade level and beyond. I know I don't think anybody questions the intent, right? I just think these instruments, like any instrument, are rough in nature and they're hard to use, and steering a big, use 100 different metaphors in here that addresses the problem, which is, are we overdoing it in a way that takes us, in my opinion, that takes us away from the essential function of teachers, right, which is instruction. They're not test givers. That's not their job. You and we collectively are the data analyzers of this, and we use them to do some information collection. But what we hire teachers to do is to teach, right? And I think it sometimes gets diverted in a noble effort to try to get an assessment, a district assessment or school assessment where we are, that we cut into that essential time. And again, that is the biggest complaint I get from teachers, is that we are diverting them from teaching. Now, there are some teachers out there that aren't doing the job, and I don't think it's because of the assessments. They're not doing the job because they might need to find another profession in there. There's three groups. There's the teachers who are always doing the great job, the teachers who are doing a good job but need help, and then there's a group of teachers, like in any profession, who just need to find another profession, right? And the assessment's not really going to find us that. These type assessments. It's the evaluation process that we sure is fair and robust, those sort of things. And I just think we conflate these things sometimes in a way that makes it harder for teachers to teach at the end of the day.
And our intent is not to make it hard. I think what you and Mr. Jess, what you're asking for, I think is novel, but it's something that is a practice that happens across districts. It's personalized learning. It's how do I take a class of 28 students and make an experience uniquely defined for each of one of those students, and that is a huge skill set that I think as a district we're headed in that direction with a more defined curriculum, with more defined assessments, where a teacher can say, I don't need to apply this assessment to that set of students, I can apply it to this set of students, and that can happen in an environment where that's strong. But I think as a district, and our academic team can probably attest to this, we're not 100% where we need to be when it comes to a novice teacher in particular being able to take a class of 25 and distinguish 5 or 6 different ways of instruction for those students. So point well taken. We're on our way there, but I think we need some more work in the meantime. Thank you.
Dr. Morley?
One final thing on that. I just want to say that what we have to also recognize, and most certainly tests can be a predictability, but then we have to have children. We have children who have difficulty taking tests. Sure. There are people who have test anxiety. Right. And oftentimes, if you don't know the subject matter, no matter how many tests you take and how much you do it, you've got to teach them how to take the test and how to be able to deal with tests and how to be able to deal with that. But I think the other thing is look at it from a holistic perspective, that it's not just about testing. What are the other variables that it takes in order to be able to get children to where they need to be? Not to where we want them to be, but where they could be and where they need to be. And I think that's been the failure of education, public or private, is that we set the benchmarks of where we think they should be, and we can't put them all in there together. When I used to teach, I had the red, blue, green group. We had to have that because you had different levels. And when I used to do the DISTAR reading, all those things like that, because you took Johnny as far as Johnny could go and you challenged him, but you made amends for whatever he didn't have. And you have to also realize that there's another variable. They're parents, and there has to be a bridge between that home and the school. We're trying to do that with student support services, but we can't do it all. But we realize that testing is not the only thing that's going to be able to say where he's lacking and what teachers can look at. Teachers have to get to know that child. And now you may have 27, 28, but from experience, you can get to know each child and begin to see what are the things that are needed and necessary to help that child to be able to move forward and to help motivate that child so he or she wants to learn. It takes a motivated teacher, first of all, a motivated principal, a motivated district, a motivated superintendent, and a motivated board. When you have all the motivation going together and a belief and expectations that they can do it, it makes a world of difference. And so testing is important, but it's not the do-all and the end-all to all. It's all about how can we make that be a part of. But since we're writing our own curriculum, we've got to get to the point where we can begin to look at our tests and work with the state and to see exactly what needs to go in so that we're making our own tests and get with other people to be able to do it done. But in the end, I still appreciate all that you do.
Thank you, Dr. Morley. Any objection to placing this item on tonight's consent agenda? Hearing none, this item will be placed on tonight's consent agenda.